Welcome to another episode of Framework for the Family. I am here with Bomani Tahimba, Zeke Adams, and my name is Brian Howard. Our topic for today, we're carrying on with spiritual warfare, part three. But our specific topic for today is the challenge of being unequally yoked. Zeke, what do you think about that? What you got for us?
So I was just saying in the last podcast about a situation of we're talking about spiritual warfare, which we're still talking about that. And in that spiritual warfare, a person was like, "Yeah, I understand about spiritual warfare. I really do. I understand that I could be tempted to say something or do something." That might be destructive in my marriage. And I was just going to say, the other person or the spouse doesn't believe in spiritual warfare, doesn't believe of prayer, doesn't believe that you have to be prayed up to understand that there is a spiritual warfare. He doesn't believe in any of that. Is that room for the person who is to divorce that person? Is that room for divorce?
So in other words, is being unequally yoked grounds for divorce? That's the question we're gonna tackle today.
Okay.
So
And I'm pulling up a verse for you right now, but short answer, no, it is not.
It is not, and you're exactly right. I would say this again. We've talked about this on other podcasts, and I've also explained some of these to some people that might be having some marriage issues, or people who are deciding to get married. Primarily them. Understand who that person is, and to understand yourself of the things that, especially spiritual or Christians. If you're a person that is a Christian and you're studying the Bible and you're living for what God is asking you to do, and there's a person who might not, understand what that might bring. That is called unequally yoked. And that might be an effective situation that might affect your relationship in a negative way down the road. A lot of us tend to find someone that might not be as Christian as us. And we try to, I think we had a conversation about it, we try to bring them up to our level of Christianity, and they might not be there. And they might get to a point that they might go the other way. So I would say before you tie the knot, jump the broom.
What's the why you work?
Understand that person's behavior.
Yeah.
Understand their spiritual connection. I always say this: understand the family background. Whether or not their family history, and to make a decision based upon you and God of whether or not that this person is equally yoked. So in saying all of that, we're talking about the spiritual warfare and being unequally yoked in the spirit, or understanding about the spiritual warfare, or understanding how a person who can be a Christian and understand spiritual warfare to someone who is not Christian, and that person's been married to him for umpteen years. This person, God has got me to a point where I understand where my Christian walk, I understand what my spouse is doing, and they don't have no spiritual warfare. They don't even care about it. They don't even know that the devil is tempting them, and you know what? I'm going to divorce them.
Okay. So let's take a pause. You raised some very good issues, and so the question is, we're dealing with part 3 of spiritual warfare. The question is challenges of being unequally yoked, and is that grounds for divorce. So let's take we're using terms unequally yoked, and we can't take it for granted that all of our viewers or even ourselves understand it. So we want to give some biblical basis for the term unequally yoked, and it's found actually in 2 Corinthians 6, 14 through 15. And Paul writes, "Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness, and what communion has light with darkness?" Wow. So Paul uses the metaphor as a yoke.
Yeah.
And a yoke is it's a wooden beam that joins two animals together. And he uses that metaphor to illustrate the challenges believers face when bound to unbelievers. And this teaching is meant to encourage Christians to consider the spiritual consequences, as you alluded to, for forming close partnerships, in this case marriage, with those who do not share their faith. Because we know that let's be honest, Christians marry unbelievers. Unbelievers marry Christians, or you could be two unbelievers, and in your marriage, one accepts Christianity, confesses Christ. So here's what the passage does not specifically address marriage, nor does it advocate for divorce if a marriage is already in place. And in fact, I think it's in Corinthians. I'm not sure which First Corinthians, but it gives in talking about the subject of divorce. I think it's First Corinthians. It's either First Corinthians chapter 7 or 2 Corinthians chapter 7. We'll get to it. I'll look it up. But I know that it talks about being married to an unbeliever.
I got you. That was my verse.
You got it. Okay.
I got you.
And so I'm going to give you Bomani's wording of it, or the effect of it. Basically says, if you are married to an unbeliever, that you stay in that marriage.
Yeah.
Because you may win the unbeliever over by your walk in Christ. So give us that scripture.
Yeah, it's 1 Corinthians 7, chapter 7, verse 14. It says, "For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they are holy." So in other words, I think, to me, even though you get into a marriage and you're not evenly matched, number one, that marriage is a covenant before God.
Yes,
and he respects that above all else. There's no excuse. He said, even though you married the wrong person, he said, you in it now.
You in it now.
You in it.
Deal with it.
So but he's not walking away from you.
Yes.
So he's saying, hey, if you are faithful, this is not a guarantee by any means, because every person has their own free will. But if you are faithful, it's likely that you could win over your husband or wife, and they'll join you in doing the right thing. Not a guarantee, but this is what God is offering. And then I just want to throw one more in there from 1 Corinthians also, 10:13.
Okay.
And this does not directly deal with marriage. But this says, no temptation has overtaken you except such as common to man. I'm skipping a little bit here. And it says, but with the temptation, will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it.
Yes.
So if you get into a situation, we're talking about marriage, we're talking about spiritual warfare. Especially in marriage, if you're in this situation and you're not equally yoked, number one, God promises you that he will give you a way out. He will help you to come out of this situation. But number two, he's saying, the chances are really good that if you're faithful, you can also win over your husband or wife.
Yeah. Can you repeat that scripture again?
Yeah, it's 1 Corinthians 10:13, and then the one about the unequally, or the marriage specifically, was 1 Corinthians 7:14.
All right.
Yeah.
And quote 10:13 again, because I want to make a comment about that.
You want me to go all the way through?
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 10:13. Go ahead,
Okay.
just read that one.
No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to bear it.
Right. And the way of escape is, I want to bring this point. The way of escape is not, if you are married to an unbeliever, the way of escape is not, quote, I'm going to divorce them. The way of escape is really continuing to be
Success.
Christian, that you, through your actions as a Christian, will win that unbeliever
Minister
over
to you.
to your
Yes.
faith. So you
Yes.
and it's by your lifestyle.
Mhm.
Okay. It's not saying, well, you're not a Christian and you're going to hell.
Right.
No, we are commanded as Christians to continue to walk in our faith. Okay, to be humble, to always have an aspect on reconciliation. We said sometime way back in one of our podcasts, in terms of marriage, the ultimate goal is you want to live with the mindset, I want to preserve my marriage.
Mm-hmm.
That regardless of what's going on in my marriage, whether we're disagreeing, well, we can't make decisions, we're fighting, what have you, if we have in the backdrop of our mind that regardless of what we're going to go through, we want to end up where the marriage is preserved, that should override anything that we could do to destroy the marriage.
Mm.
Yes.
Now let me throw a curveball in that.
Okay, you throwing curveballs again.
I feel
Yes.
it does not mean in listening to this podcast that you are in an area of being about to get married,
Mm-hmm.
or you think you're going to get married in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Help me with this. I don't think that you should take this as, you know what, I'm going to get married and try to change them.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
No, absolutely.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll agree with you.
If you got to change them, you shouldn't be getting married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
for the people that are married, like you said, and
Mhm.
they was two non-believers, one of them became a believer, that is not a green light for divorce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm
Okay.
a Christian
Divide.
now. I got to
Yeah.
divorce you because I'm unequally yoked.
I'm unequally yoked.
Okay.
Right.
And let's also state this: what we're not talking about. We're not talking about being in an abusive, physically abusive
Relationship.
situation.
That's a different story.
That's a different story. That's any time that we're talking about this, we have to keep that at the mindset. We're in the backdrop. We are not talking about a physically abusive that could lead to you being killed or brutalized or hurt
Yeah.
irreparably. We're never talking about a situation like that, nor are we advocating that you stay in that dangerous,
Situation.
life-threatening situation. So
Right.
we're never
Yeah.
ever talking about
We're
that.
talking about non-life threatening situations when we come to understanding what the spiritual Christian is going through when it comes to spiritual warfare. And just like I'll repeat what Bomani is saying, if a person becomes Christian and they understand about spiritual warfare and their partner does not, that is not room for divorce. Unequally yoked, I would say to understand that framework for the family is based upon the family,
Mhm.
but also people who could be listening to our podcast who is thinking about getting married
Absolutely.
can also take this information to say, hey, you know what? They got some good things I need to really dig into and understand before I get married
Even about myself.
about myself.
Yes.
It would be for the best.
And we're going to tell you, yeah, it's for the best that you do that and understand what God is asking you to do. A lot of times, these relationships that you're hearing is that someone tried to change
Mhm.
someone. Oh, you know what? Man, he looks good, and you know what? Yeah, he's out here in the streets, or he's doing this or doing that.
I know he got a lot of girlfriends.
He got a lot of girlfriends,
but I'm gonna change
but
him.
I can change him.
That's a
And when they get married,
That's a formula for disaster.
Heartache. Boy.
Yeah, heartache,
Gonna be a lot of
trouble.
understand it, people.
Understand it. Yeah.
So that's unequally yoked, and you're knowingly
Mhm.
know that you're unequally yoked, and you are pursuing an unequally yoked, knowing it, to get married to, that is a different situation of someone who is married and already in the marriage and say, hey, you know what? God called me, and I believe in God, and I gave my life to Him, but my partner is struggling. God is asking you to stay in that marriage and minister to your spouse. There is no room for divorce when it comes to that.
We got to say, even if you walk right into this situation, eyes wide open, knowing this person wasn't for you, that's still not a reason for divorce.
You mean
No.
and you chose to marry
and you chose to marry him.
Right.
Yeah, that's still not a reason.
It's
for
still not a
divorce.
reason because you
Now, you know you're going to have a lot of problems, and you should have known up front, and we're not going to play the blame game, but even in that situation, God is offering you a way out.
Sure. Exactly.
And it requires you to be faithful to your marriage and then also to God so that He can help you straighten that situation out.
Is there a time limit on the way out?
I don't know. And
because that's what you know, how much longer should I be sitting here praying? How much longer is he's gonna be here telling me this and being ungodly like and cursing and all this stuff, and how much longer?
How much
This is
longer?
what
How long?
Instead of focusing on the person or the situation, focus on yourself and God.
There you go.
If two things have to be in order for me. Two things got to be in order. If I'm in this situation that's not to my liking, the first thing I have to do is remove all my negative influences from that situation.
Man, yes.
But then once I've done that, then my focus is on God. God, I've done everything I can do. What should I be doing next? And I'm not. God doesn't advocate divorce, but whatever He tells you to do, then that's what you do.
Sure.
Okay, but you shouldn't be throwing your hands up and throwing in the towel before you've, number one, eliminated your negative contributions and then waited for God to tell you what to do. If you otherwise, I mean, you just have to deal with the results. I mean, everybody's a free agent. You can do what you want, but
let me throw this in as we continue to talk about this topic, and I want to throw in when marriage ends. Okay, biblically speaking, there's two scenarios where marriage ends. One is death, the death of your spouse, that ends your marriage. Okay, the other one is adultery.
Yes,
right.
If adultery is involved. And then it's not mandatory that you divorce.
Right.
That is a situation that God says, you know what?
I'll allow it.
I'll allow you to divorce them. And you can legally divorce, biblically speak. You can legally according to the Bible in your marriage through divorce because your spouse committed adultery. It's not a requirement. It's not something that you should you automatically do,
right?
But God understands that severing of the marriage through adultery that really impacts the marriage, and it's a special type of person, a special type of Christian who can stay in that marriage after adultery has taken place. It's not impossible. It's not impossible.
No,
God
it's not.
allows you to divorce because you may not be equipped to remain in the marriage after that. It takes a special type of person but if you forgive your spouse who has committed adultery and you remain in the marriage,
You got to stay committed.
You got to stay committed,
yes.
And now you can't say, you can't keep bringing that up to them, So
you did this, you did that,
you did that. How many women you slept with, or how many men you slept with, or whatever. But the main point is, I wanted to just pause and say there are two reasons where a marriage ends. A marriage ends with the death of your spouse. Marriage ends in divorce because of adultery. Your marriage can end.
Now, I've been hearing this and a lot. I prayed and God told me to leave. I was praying and God told me to leave the marriage.
Listen, like if you're
I've
gonna sit
heard-
there
listen,
and lie
yes.
on God, I don't believe God would tell that.
I
But if
heard-
you,
yes.
follow your heart, then go for it. Because
God told me to leave the
God
marriage.
didn't tell you that. You told yourself
Exactly.
that. And you blamed it on
Exactly.
God.
But look,
You blamed it on God.
You're gonna have to answer to God for that.
Yeah.
I personally, I would never believe that, but
I think that is demonic.
you can't take
really.
somebody's choice.
I think that is a saying because anything that goes against God, I think it is and when I hear that, I cringe because I try to dig down into what that statement means. Okay. First of all, that is not of God.
Yes. Right.
That spirit is not of God. So that means someone had to actually, when they say that, they are saying that God himself
Is a liar.
is
That's
a
what you're
liar that goes against his own
Yeah.
laws.
Mm-hmm.
That's deep to me. And I would be like, don't say that. Well,
Sure.
yeah, God, I've been praying. God, it just wasn't right for me.
Sure.
And God told me to leave.
I think we need to answer those instances with Bible truth.
Yeah.
Okay. So they may, whether they are deliberately making up that lie or whether they are falsely misconstruing what God is telling them to do, I think we need to correct that with biblical truth, and you need to guide people to certain scriptures. And I think
Yes.
it's in Malachi where it says God hates divorce. You've got New Testament scriptures where Jesus talks about the only reason for divorce is through adultery and what have you. You need to guide a person into
Yes.
biblical truth
Yes.
and then ask them, how can you balance
Yes.
what you were saying,
Yes.
what you're believing that God told you to do against the backdrop of these scriptures, which are totally different,
Mm-hmm.
contrary to what you said God told you to do.
Yeah.
And then allow them to, that's going to be a question that
Right.
they have to deal with.
Right.
And
And mentally,
Mhm.
they use, well, God told me to leave. That means that also.
It's not my fault. That's really
Yeah,
what you're saying.
it's-
It's
and
not
it
my
responds
fault.
to the person because God told me to leave. That person that I'm leaving is I'm unequally yoked with that person, and God is saying, "Hey, you are unequally yoked with that person.
Get
You
on
need
now.
go ahead and leave."
Get on.
That is not true
Yes.
whatsoever.
Mhm.
So going back to being equally yoked, some people use that
Unequally yoked.
unequally yoked.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry. Of using unequally yoked, and they use that to be able to manipulate situations such as that. To use that for he left because God told him to, and some people believe that, and that's not true at all. So understanding there is a areas of being in the marriage when you're unequally yoked. God is not telling you to leave that marriage. We've also talked about the dangers. If it's physical altercations, get out of there.
Yeah.
But when people use their differences, who they are, and what their spouse is not, okay? What are some of the things that we can do to be able to minister to the spouse in the marriage that is not that's not Christian? I mean, what are some of the things that you say? Hey, can you come to church with me? No. Can you read with me? No. Can you pray with me? No, I don't want to pray.
Okay. So let me before we get in that, because I see you ready to answer that question. So just put a pin right there. Put a pin right there, and I just want to I said I gave examples where the marriage ends.
Yes.
I said death, and in the case of adultery,
Mhm.
Paul actually adds another one. Paul does,
Okay.
and it's actually in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where it's speaking of for believers married to unbelievers. Paul provides clear guidance in 1 Corinthians 7, 12 through 16. says first, he says basically stay married if possible.
Mhm.
It says if any brother has a wife who does not believe and she is willing to live with him, let him not divorce her. And a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. That was verses 12 through 13. And then also Paul encourages Christians to remain in the marriage if the unbelieving spouse is willing to stay. That's what we just read. The believing spouse presence can have a sanctifying influence on the household. However, Paul offers an exception, and it's abandonment. It says, but it, and this is Paul speaking, and even if you read it, Paul makes it clear, I am speaking, not the Spirit.
Thank you.
He says, but if the unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. That's verse 15. In other words, if the unbelieving spouse chooses to leave, chooses to abandon the marriage, the believer is not obligated to maintain the marriage. And this principle is often referred to as Pauline's privilege. So Paul gives us another...
Can I interpret that a little bit?
He gives another one. Yeah, sure. But I'm just saying Paul gives us another out, so to speak, that if the unbeliever abandons you, that the marriage ends.
To your point, I don't even think really Paul is adding anything new, in my opinion. Like, if you look at this situation, under no circumstance do I have control over another human being.
Sure.
So if they decide to leave and violate the marriage contract that we've made before God, that's between them and God. I couldn't stop them. You know what I mean? I cannot force them to stay. And so if they leave, and so what it seems like Paul to me is doing is saying, look, if the unbeliever leaves you, he said, you're not bound by that marriage anymore. He said, not because you did anything wrong, because they refused to stay. And so would it be
that's a de facto divorce.
It is, but it's not one that you had any choice in.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so if you did not have a choice in that situation, he's saying that won't be held against you.
Yeah.
Now, I'm gonna say this, because what's so confusing in how we actually use Paul's scripture, it does not give people an out to be able to utilize, abandonment. Okay. Well, there's a young person that's saying, hey, you know what? My spouse is not sexual. I need to find somebody else. I'm a divorce.
Yeah.
They're not sexual. I am. I need a divorce and find someone who's sexual. They're utilizing that as abandonment.
Yeah.
Spiritual, then?
I'd have to disagree with you.
Okay, I disagree with it too. But I'm saying this is real.
Sure.
But I want someone to say I love. They never say I love you. They just, it's not in them to say I love you, and I want to hear that every day, and they just don't say it. And you know what? I want to find someone that can actually
speaks my love
that
language.
speak my love language. I'm going to divorce that person because I'm being abandoned by these certain acts. That is not room for divorce. So let's clear that up.
Sure.
I don't want us to fall into this area of what Paul is saying for people to misuse that and manipulate it into something else.
So our topic that we started with, which is a continuum of our overarching topic, which is the third part, spiritual warfare. And we pose a question in this particular segment: does being unequally yoked,
how does that affect?
How it is in a marriage, is that grounds for divorce? And we all emphatically agree that it's no. We did talk about how the marriage ends through death. It ends through infidelity and abandonment. Paul adds one, but I actually like your point that Paul is expressing something with a biblical basis from his understanding. But the overarching theme is it's a resounding no. If you are married and you're unequally yoked, that does not give you a license to say, because my spouse is an unequally yoked person, is an unbelieving person, I'm going to use that as grounds for divorce. The answer is no. And again, we qualify that. We are never, ever talking about physical, life-threatening situation. If you're in a marriage where someone is knocking you over your head and getting out baseball bats or beating you or what have you, it doesn't even have to be that extreme. That you may want to seek some safety for not only you, but if children are involved, you need to seek some safety for them as well. I'm Bomani Tyehimba, and this is Framework for the Family. Here with my co-hosts, Ezekiel Adams and Brian Howard. And we just thank you. Look forward to our next podcast.
Yes.
For whatever topic. We're going to have an engaging topic. So we want you to hit that subscribe button. We want you to hit that like button.
Yes.
And we want to hear some comments, see some comments. Thank you for joining us with Framework for the Family.
Bye.
Bye-bye.